the government's ran by a bunch of Pizzagate, adrenochrome sucking, they're killing all these children and blah, 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 blah. Just to be clear, one of the things I try to do, this is just my personal preference, maybe you disagree, I deal with a lot of people that have radically different political views than me, and sometimes what happens is bad shit happens to me when I debate them. So, for example, I've had my employer called and told that I was a bigot, racist, and then in an attempt to get me to lose my job. I've had passwords hacked and things like that. I don't blame the person I'm debating, though, right? Because, although you can foster an environment where you have radical followers, in general, I am very well understanding that hypothetically some crazy person that supports me could go do something shitty like dox someone. Should I be blamed for that? I hope not. I tell people all the time, don't do that stuff, be reasonable. So I try my best, unless I have evidence to the contrary. If I engage with a person and a member of their community, or I suspect a member of their community does something, I try to not judge them. So it's entirely possible that someone that's a fan of Zoe did something, and she had no hand in directing it, and I don't think you're suggesting that there's any evidence that she personally did any of this stuff.
No,
but I do think it's newsworthy.
Well, she did share the article.
Right, I mean with the defacing of the
defacing of the hacking, yeah.
Right. So, I mean, you start to wonder, at that point it's a little worse, because if you're doxing people, then it's clear that you're sending a signal to your audience that unethical behavior is acceptable. So that's a little different. But I just making a general statement that I understand it's definitely newsworthy. It's worthy to bring up, obviously, in this context. But I do try to look at those things and say, well, unless I see otherwise, I'm not personally blaming Zoe Quinn or personally blaming
I would never.
Right. That's all I was saying. Yeah.
For sure. Well, well, this is a whole thing, but do you want to talk about to what extent do you think you are responsible for your audience? Because I agree with you mostly, maybe entirely. Unless you're telling people to do this, or I would even go a step further, because one thing that Destiny does actually is he has a rule where if you're a member of his community, you're in his Discord or whatever, and he finds out, or the moderators find out that you're going after the people he has on a show and doxing them, but you're doing it outside the server, you're still gone. I have the same rule.
Yeah, I would do that.
I found out that, yeah.
But I would say that
if there's proof.
Right. I don't think that I'm ethically on the line if I'm not searching to make sure that this stuff doesn't come. I also think that there's varying degrees of culpability. For example, if I come on and I say, hypothetically, right? If I come on and I say the election was stolen, right? They're going to take over your country. They're going to come and they're going to take all your guns. And then someone that follows me goes out and does something radical. I don't think I'm really to blame. I don't. However, I myself try to take it a step further, where I try to always discuss, almost every show, if you hear at the end of it, I'll discuss nothing that we talk about legitimizes any unethical behavior or any amounts of violence. It is immoral and it's non-strategic, right? There are things in life more important than the things we're talking about, like your personal relationship with God, your family relationship, your image of yourself, all of those things. So never feel so black-pilled that you feel that you have to do one of these unethical things. Now, if you don't do those things and a member of your audience does something shitty, I'm not saying that you're legally on the hook or that makes you the worst person in the world or anything like that. But I try to hold myself to a standard that's a little higher, in that even if I'm a small streamer, there are people that listen to me, and I find being authentic to be one of the most important things. And I hope that it comes across that I'm a really fun, happy person, because even though I talk about issues I consider serious and I get angry and I'm yelling about them, I have the greatest family in the world. I'm one of the happiest people you ever meet. And for me, it would be unethical to leave people in a state where I'm giving the misimpression that life is not worth living and miserable because of corruption, or in this case, because of patriarchy, or whatever the case may be. You know what I'm saying? Whatever. Because people on the left will also say, there's a trans genocide occurring. There's they paint a very bleak picture of the world. So I think that it's not something that I'm morally judging you as the worst person in the world if you don't take those steps, but I think it would behoove all of us to be authentic and to kind of let an audience know there are both more moral. And if I can't convince you, I say this all the time, if I can't convince you of the morality, let me convince you of why strategically resorting to these behaviors are terrible. For example, if you were to dox Zoe Quinn, she will use it to appear as a victim, which will increase her message in the narrative. So all you're doing is helping her. And it's immoral. And I should be able to sell you on the moral argument, right? But not everyone's like that. So sometimes you have to go a step further, right? Like, if you think that marching on some governmental building with firearms to take it over, that's immoral. But if I can't convince you of that, it's also not strategic. You're going to go to prison the rest of your life, and you're not going to accomplish the goal that you set forth. So that's the standard I hold myself to. But you're right. There's degrees of culpability, right? There's the person that straight up tells their audience, yes, do this horrible thing. Then there's the person that just says, hey, if something horrible happened to them, I'd be okay. Then there's the person that knows that it's happening, but doesn't condemn it, right? Then there's the person that might condemn it if they hear that it's happening, but they kind of talk about how bleak things are and you know. So
right, that's the level where I feel like
I agree.
There's no quote unquote moral culpability, but there's no moral culpability. I would say, maybe you'll disagree with me, but there's no moral culpability for like the actions. Like, okay, so like let's say you're like a bomb thrower, you know, and you're out there every single day. Our country's being taken. We gotta fight back. You know, whatever, right? And you're like that every single day. Not that you are, but like if I were like that, or let's say I'm like that, right? Like, oh my God, Kotaku is so evil. You know, they're gonna destroy gamers. We gotta fight back by any means necessary. Well, actually, that might be going too far. The any means necessary, but we have to fight back. That's why I use that kind of rhetoric all the time. I'm not like responsible if one of my followers like throws a bomb into throws a Molotov cocktail into Kotaku's office, right? But I am creating like an environment to some extent where that's more likely to happen, and I should probably be more careful.
Yeah,
right?
that's what I'm saying. I wouldn't take legal action. I don't even say that makes you necessarily morally a bad person if you don't do that, because you could just say, hey, it's not my job to hold people's hands. I'm just talking about what I think's the news. I'm clearly not going to do anything radical. Someone hears that and does bad shit. It's not my job to sit here and try to prevent, you know, that. I got better things on my mind. And that's sort of, there's some truth to that, right? It's one of the things I hate being a streamer that like, for example, I'll give you something that for me, maybe you don't consider this tangentially connected, but one of the things I hate the most is when I'll say like, well, the Democrats want this, you know, and someone will go, actually, I'm a Democrat and I don't want that. And it's like, right. Okay. But it's hard to talk without labels because we're human and that's how humans communicate. And this is the official platform of the Democratic Party. And this is what Biden's administration is pushing for. And this is what Nancy Pelosi and Chuck Schumer are pushing for. So you're right. There is no universal statement that you could say, oh, you know, men like sports. Well, no, not all, I guess, but it's still a true statement. You know, I feel the same way. Like, you don't, at some point you could water down your message so much because you're worried about all this periphery. Well, I have to warn people not to take bad actions, and I have to ensure that I say, you know, that your message becomes unwatchable, right? Or it's unimpactful. So I understand that level of it. I'm just saying that, you know, for me, if I was to give advice to a streamer and the standard I hold myself to, I think that it's important to not leave people with a depressed view of things, to kind of let people know that there are better strategic and moral ways to go about things. That's just my preference. I'm not saying that. Now, I'll full disclosure, I've gone after people for shit, holding them to their own standards. For example, I don't know if you know who Vosh is, but Vosh is quick to call out stochastic terrorism. Tucker Carlson's a stochastic terrorist. I would be a stochastic terrorist. Why? Well, because we talk about the evils of the establishment, and therefore that predictably will lead someone to go take a terrible action. Meanwhile, Vosh...
Well, he's anti-establishment too, isn't he?
Oh, well, Vosh goes on and says there's a trans-genocide. And then he says, and you need to arm yourself. And then he says, shouldn't we have stopped Hitler before he came into power? And then he says, I envision a world where we could shoot at Patriot Prayer people out windows. That's what Vosh says. He literally tells us.
I've not seen that, but I
sure, of course, in no way are you co-signing this, and I could be making. But I'm just saying, in that point, I think that it's relevant for me to be like, if your standard is judging other people for stochastic terrorism, and then you say that, you can't claim ignorance at that point. You can't be like, oh, I didn't know that had the potential to radicalize someone. Because it's like, that's your whole grift. You're already criticizing the opposite side of that. And the same would be true in the opposite way. If I want to say that it's stochastic terrorism for people to talk about trans-genocide, right, but then say like, the government's ran by a bunch of Pizzagate, adrenochrome sucking, you know, they're killing all these children and blah, 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 and we need to take it back and we need to arm ourselves. Yeah, I would be levied the same criticism that I'm levying at the people.
You gotta give Vosh a break, though, okay? It's just horseplay.
It is, you know, unbridled enthusiasm for, you know, the equine and the shooting of conservatives, Mr. Vosh. So, you know,
he thought they were goblins, okay?
Yeah,
You saw that?
You should write a book on that. That's what you try. Yeah, I mean, whatever. His sexual dalliances are the least of my concerns when it comes to things that I think are unethical about him.